네, 한 권으로 500권 읽기 도전하고 있는 꾸준한 영어 테드쌤입니다. 61번째부터는 오롯이 섀도우 리딩으로 한번 가보려고 했는데 섀도우 리딩이 생각보다 중요한 것 같아요. 이게 사람들마다 더 관점이 다르겠지만 이제 테스트를 해보고 있는 저의 입장에서는 음원 없이 이제 음원을 물론 처음에는 몇 번 듣기도 하고 이렇게 했었어요. 근데 총 60번을 반복해서 같은 것을 읽다 보니까 저 나름대로의 책을 읽기 방법이 생겼고 그게 이제 그 리듬을 타게 되었는데 물론 이제 제가 원어민이 아니까 온전한 원어민식 리듬이 나오지는 않겠죠. 근데 이제 나름 비슷해지지 않았나, 그리고 이제 그 감각이 생기지 않았나라고 생각을 했는데 좀 전에 원어민 음원을 들으면서 읽어봤는데 속도는 WPM 150에서 160, 그러니까 분당 150에서 160 단어 정도의 속도의 음원인데, 다 따라 할 수 있는데, 이상하게 또, 이제, 들으면서 바로 따라 해보겠다라고, 이제 아무런 그 스크립트 없이 음원으로만 따라 해보겠다고 했더니, 생각보다, 저는 분명히 완벽하게 따라 할 줄 알았는데, 리듬이 제가 생각했던 거랑 너무 많이 틀려요. 그렇다는 것은 이제 영어가 가지는 본인의 리듬이라는 게 있는데 이 책을 읽어줄 때 그 책을 읽어주시는 너레이터분은 굉장히 신경을 써서 읽었겠죠. 이걸 전달하는 것이 이제 전달력이 그대로 전달될 수 있도록 훨씬 더 생생하고 재밌게 전달되기 위해서 읽으셨기 때문에 이 리듬을 저는 좀 알았으면 좋겠거든요. 근데 이제 이게 제가 했던 방식과 틀렸다는 걸 알게 되면서 지금 조금 충격을 받았습니다. 그렇지만 이제 이게 이제 배워가는 과정이라고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 한 몇 번은 제가 스크립트와 소리를 같이 들으면서 지금 제가 하고자 하는 목적은 그 리듬감이, 그러니까 이야기를 전달하기 위한 방식이 이제 끊어 읽기도 있을 것이고 청크 단위로 어떻게 이렇게 이야기를 전달하는지 원어민식 사고를 제가 이해를 하고 싶거든요. 그래서 여러 번 읽어야 된다라는 얘기를 했구나라는 생각이 들기는 합니다. 물론 이제 아직 초반이기 때문에 뭐라 말하기는 그렇지만, 그래서 일단 음원을 들으면서 제가 한번 해보도록 하겠습니다. Bunnicula Chapter 1 The Arrival. I shall never forget the first time I laid these now tired old eyes on our future. I had been left at home by the family with the admonition to take care of the house until they returned. That's something they always say to me when they go out. Take care of the house, Harold. You are the watchdog. I think it's their way of making up for not taking me with them, as if I wanted to go anyway. You can't lie down at the movies and still see the screen. And the people think you're being impolite if you fall asleep and start to snore or scratch yourself in public. No, thank you. I'd rather be stretched out on my favorite rug in front of a nice whistling radiator. But I digress. I was talking about that first night. Well, it was cold. The rain was pelting the windows. The wind was howling, and it felt pretty good to be indoors. I was lying on the rug with my head on my paws, just staring absently at the front door. My friend Chester was curled up on the brown velvet armchair, which years ago he'd staked out as his own. I saw that once again he'd covered the whole seat with his cat hair, and I chuckled to myself, picturing the scene tomorrow. Next to grasshoppers, there is nothing that frightens Chester more than the vacuum cleaner. In the midst of this reverie, I heard the car pull into the driveway. I didn't even bother to get up and to see who it was. I knew it had to be my family, the Monroes, since it was just about time for the movie to be over. After a moment, the front door flew open. There they stood in the doorway, Toby and Pete and Mom and Dad Monroe. There was a flash of lightning, and in its glare, I noticed that Mr. Monroe was carrying a little bundle, a bundle with tiny, glistening eyes. Pete and Toby bounded into the room, both talking at the top of their lungs. Toby shouted, "Put him over here, Dad!" Take your boots off, you're soaking wet, replied his mother. Somewhat calmly, I thought, under the circumstances. But, Mom, what about first stop dripping on the carpet? Would somebody like to take this? Asked Mr. Monroe, indicating the bundle with the eyes. I'd like to remove my coat. I will, Pete yelled. No, I will, said Toby. I found him. You will drop him. I will not. You will too. Mom, Pete punched me. I will take him, said Mrs. Monroe. Take off your coat this minute. But she became so involved in helping the boys out of their coats that she didn't take him at all. My tranquil evening had been destroyed, and no one had even said hello to me. I whimpered to remind them that I was there. Harold, cried Toby, guess what happened to me? And then all over again, everyone started talking at once. At this point, I feel I must explain something. In our family, everyone treats everyone else with their greater respect for his or her intelligence. That goes for the animals as well as the people. Everything that happens to them is explained to us. It's never been just, good boy, Harold, or use the little box Chester at our house. Oh no. With us, it's, hey Harold, Dad got a raise and now we are in a higher tax bracket. Or come sit on the bed, Chester, and watch this Wild Kingdom show. Maybe you will see a relative, which shows just how thoughtful they are. But after all, Mr. Monroe is a college professor and Mrs. Monroe is a lawyer, so we think of it as a rather special household, and we are therefore rather special pets. So it wasn't at all surprising to me that they took the time to explain the strange circumstances surrounding the arrival of the little bundle with the glistening eyes now among us. It seems that they had arrived at the theater late, and rather than trip over the feet of the audience already seated, they decided to sit in the last row, which was empty. They tiptoed in and sat down very quietly, so they wouldn't disturb anyone. Suddenly, Toby, who's the little one, sprang up from his chair and squealed that he had sat on something. Mr. Monroe told him to stop making a fuss and move to another seat. But in an unusual display of independence, Toby said he wanted to see just what it was he had sat on. An usher came over to their row to shush them, and Mr. Monroe borrowed his flashlight. What they found on Toby's chair was the little blanket bundle that was now sitting on Mr. Monroe's lap. They now unwrapped the blanket, and there in the center was a tiny black and white rabbit, sitting in a shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied to his neck with a ribbon. There were words on the paper, but the Monroes were unable to decipher them because they were in a totally unfamiliar language. I moved closer for a better look. Now, most people might call me a mongrel, but I have some pretty fancy bloodlines running through these veins, and the Russian Opland happens to be one of them. Because my family got around a lot, I was able to recognize the language as an obscure dialect of the Carpathian mountain region. Roughly translated, it read, "Take good care of my baby." But I couldn't tell if it was a note from a bereaved mother or a piece of Romanian sheet music. The little guy was shivering from fear and cold. It was decided that Mr. Monroe and the boys would make a house frame out of the old crate and some heavy-duty wire mesh from the garage. For the night, the boys would make a bed for him and the shoebox. Toby and Peter ran outside to find the crate, and Mrs. Monroe went to the kitchen to get him some milk and lettuce. Mr. Monroe sat down, a dazed expression in his eyes, as if he were wondering how he came to be sitting in his own living room in a wet raincoat with a strange bunny on his lap. I signaled to Chester, and the two of us casually moved over to a corner of the room. We looked at each other. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think rabbits like milk," he answered. Chester and I were unable to continue our conversation because a deafening crash commanded our attention. Pete yelled from the hallway, "Mom, Toby broke the rabbit's house!" "I didn't, I just dropped it. Peter won't let me carry it. It's too big, Toby's too little." "I'm not, you're too." "Okay, fellas," Mrs. Monroe called out as she entered with the milk and lettuce. "Let's try to get it in here, with as little hysteria as possible, please." Chester turned to me and said under his breath, "That lettuce looks repulsive, but if there's any milk left, I get it." I certainly wasn't going to argue with him. I'm a waterman myself. At that moment, the crate arrived, barely standing the strain of being pulled in two directions at once. Ma, Toby says he's gonna keep the rabbit in his room. That's not fair. Harold sleeps on his room. Only sometimes I thought that when I know he's got a leftover Sam sandwich in his drawer. Toby's a nice kid, don't get me wrong. But it doesn't hurt that he shared his stash with me. It was, after all, at one of those late-night parties in Toby's room that I first developed my taste for chocolate cake. And Toby, noting my preference, has kept me in chocolate cake ever since. Pete, on the other hand, doesn't believe in sharing. And the only time I tried to sleep on his bed, he rolled over on me and pinned me by my ears so that I couldn't move for the rest of the night. I had a crick in my neck for days. But he's mine, Toby said. I found him. You sat on him, you mean. I found him and he's sleeping in my room. You can keep smelly old Harold in your room and Chester too if you want to, but I'm gonna keep the rabbit in mine, Pete said. Smelly old Harold. I would have bitten his ankle, but I knew he hadn't changed his socks for a week. Smelly, indeed. Mr. Monroe spoke up. I think the best place for the rabbit is right here in the living room, on that table by the window. It's a light there, and he will get lots of fresh air. Peter's taller than I am, Toby cried. He'll be able to see the rabbit better. Too bad, Skirt. Okay, said Mrs. Monroe through clenched teeth. Let's put him to bed and make him comfortable, and we can all get some sleep. Why? Peter asked. I don't want to go to sleep. Mrs. Monroe smiled a little too sweetly at Pete. Look, Ma, said Toby. He's not drinking his milk. Chester nudged me in the ribs. Didn't I tell you? He asked. Excuse me while I make myself available. Hey, said Toby. We gotta name him. Can't that wait until tomorrow? Asked Mr. Monroe. The boys shouted in unison. No, he has to have a name right now. I have to say I agreed with them. It took them 3 days to name me, and those were the 3 most anxious days of my life. I couldn't sleep at all, worrying that they were really gonna call me Fluffy, as Mrs. Monroe had suggested. Well, all right, sighed Mrs. Monroe. What about, say, Bun Bun? Uh-oh, there she goes again, I thought. Where does she get them? Yuck, we all said. Well then, how about Fluffy? She offered, hopefully. Pete looked at his mother and smiled. You never give up, do you, Ma? Meanwhile, Chester, who had also been named Fluffy for a short time, was rubbing against Mrs. Monroe's ankles and purring loudly. No, Chester, not now, she said, pushing him aside. He wants to help us name him, don't you, Chester? Toby asked as he scooped him up into his arms. Chester shot me a look. I could tell this was not what he had in mind. Come on, Harold, Toby called. You've got to help me with the name, too. I joined the family, and the serious thinking began. We all peeled into the box. It was the first time I had really seen him. So, this is your rabbit, I thought. He sort of looks like Chester, only he's got longer ears and a short tail, and a motor in his nose. Well, said Pete, after a moment, since we found him at the movies, why don't we call him Mr. Johnson? There was a moment of silence. Who's Mr. Johnson? Asked Toby. The guy who owns the movie theater, Pete answered. No one seemed to like the idea. How about the prince? Said Mr. Monroe. Dad, said Toby. Are you kidding? Well, I had a dog named the Prince once, he replied lamely. Prince, I thought. That's a silly name for a dog. We found him at a Dracula movie. Let's call him Dracula, Toby said. That's a stupid name, said Pete. No, it's not. And anyway, I found him, so I should get to name him. Mom, you're not going to let him name him, are you? That's a favoritism, and I'll be traumatized if you do. Mrs. Monroe looked in wonder at Pete. Please, Mom. Please, Dad. Let's name him Dracula, cried Toby. Please, please, please. And with each please, he squeezed Chester a little harder. Mrs. Monroe picked up the bowl of milk and moved toward the kitchen. Chester followed her every movement with his eyes, which now seemed to be popping out of his head. When she reached the kitchen door, she turned back and said, Let's not have any more arguments. We will compromise. He's a bunny, and we found him at a Dracula movie, so we will call him... Bunnicula. Bunnicula. That should make everybody happy, including me. What about me? Muttered Chester. I won't be happy until she puts down that milk. Well, guys, is that okay with you? She asked. Toby and Peter looked at one another, and then at the rabbit. A smile grew on Toby's face. Yeah, Ma. I think that name is just right. Pete shrugged. It's okay, but I get to feed him. Okay, I'm gonna put the milk back in the fridge. Maybe he will drink it tomorrow. What about Chester? Toby said, dropping the frantic head to the floor. Maybe he would like it. Chester made a beeline for Mrs. Munro and looked up at her plaintively. Oh, Chester doesn't want any more milk, do you, Chester? You've already had your milk today. She reached down, patted Chester on his head, and walked into the kitchen. Chester didn't move. Okay, bedtime, said Mr. Munro. Good night, Bunnicula, Toby said. Good night, Count Bunnicula, Peter said sarcastically, in what I took to be his attempt at a Transylvanian accent. I may be wrong, but I thought I saw a particular movement from the cage. Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. I licked Toby good night. Good night, Smiley Harold. Good night, dumb Chester. I drooled on Pete's foot. Mom, Harold drooled on my foot. Good night, Pete, Mrs. Munro said with a great finality as she came back into the living room, and then more calmly, Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. Mr. and Mrs. Munro went up the stairs together. You know, dear, Mr. Munro said, that was very clever, Bunnicula. I could never have thought of a name like that. Oh, I don't know, Robert, she smiled as she put her arm through his. I think Prince is a lovely name, too. The room was quiet. Chester was still sitting by the closed kitchen door, and in a state of shock, slowly he turned to me. I wish they had named him Floppy, was all he said. Okay. Chapter 1. The Arrival. I shall never forget the first time I laid these now tired old eyes on our visitor. I had been left home by the family, with the admonition to take care of the house until they returned. That's something they always say to me when they go out. Take care of the house, Harold. You are the watchdog. I think their way of making up for not taking me with them, as if I wanted to go anyway. You can't lie down at the movies and still see the screen. And people think you're being impolite if you fall asleep and start to snore, or scratch yourself in public. No, thank you. I'd rather be stretched out on my favorite rug in front of a nice whistling radiator. But I digress. I was talking about their first night. Well, it was cold. The rain was pelting the windows. The wind was howling, and it felt pretty good to be indoors. I was lying on the rug with my head on my paws, just staring absently at the front door. My friend Chester was curled up on the brown velvet armchair, which years ago he staked out as his own. I saw that once again he covered the whole seat with his cat hair, and I chuckled to myself, picturing the scene tomorrow. Next to grasshoppers, there is nothing that frightens Chester more than bacon clean. In the midst of this reverie, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't even bother to get up and to see who it was. I knew it had to be my family, the Monroes, since it was just a half-time movie to be over. After a moment, the front door flew open. There they stood on the doorway, Toby and Pete and Mom and Dad Monroe. There was a flash of lightning, and its glare. I noticed that Mr. Monroe was carrying a little bundle, a bundle with tiny glistening eyes. Pete and Toby bounded into the room, both talking at the top of their lungs. Toby shouted, "Put him over here, Dad! Take your boots off, you're soaking wet," replied his mother, somewhat calmly, I thought, under the circumstances. "But Mom, what about?" "First, stop dripping on the carpet." Would somebody to take this? I'd like to remove my coat. 순간 놓쳐가지고요. 지금 다시 시작하도록 하겠습니다. I will. I found him. You drop him. I will not. You will too. Mom, Pete punched me. I will take him, said Mrs. Monroe. Take off your coat this minute. But she became so involved in having the boys out of their coat, he didn't take him at all. My tranquil evening had been destroyed, and no one even said hello to me. I whimpered to remind them that I was there. Harold, cried Toby, guess what happened to me? And then, all over again, everyone started talking at once. At this point, I feel I must explain something. In our family, everyone treats everyone else with greater respect for his or her intelligence. That goes for the animals as well as the people. Everything that happens to them is explained to us. It's never been just, good boy, Harold, or use the little box Chester at our house. Oh no. With us, it's, hey, Harold, Dad got a raise and now we are a higher tax bracket. Come sit on the bed, Chester, and watch this Wild Kingdom show. Maybe you will see a relative. Which shows just how thoughtful they are. But after all, Mr. Monroe is a college professor and Mrs. Monroe is a lawyer. So we think of it as a rather special household. And we are therefore rather special house pets. So it wasn't at all surprising to me. They took the time to explain strange circumstances surrounding the arrival with the little bundle glistening-eyed among us. It seems they had arrived at the theater late, and rather than trip over the pit of audience already seated, they decided to sit in the last row, which was empty. They tiptoed in and sat down very quietly so they wouldn't disturb anyone. Suddenly, Toby, who's the little one, sprang up from his chair and squeaked. He said on something. Mr. In an unusual display of independence, Toby said he wanted to see what he had sat on. An usher came over to their row to shush them, and Mr. Monroe borrowed his flashlight. What they found on Toby's chair was a little blanket bundle, which was now sitting on Mr. Monroe's lap. They now unwrapped the blanket. There in the center was a tiny black and white rabbit, sitting in a shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied to his neck as a ribbon. There were words on the paper that the Monroes unable to decipher them. There was a totally unfamiliar language. I moved closer to better look. But I had some pretty pensive blood lines running through these veins, and the Russian word happened to be one of them. Because my family got around a lot, I was able to recognize the language as an obscure dialect of the Carpathian mountain region. Roughly translated, it read, "Take good care of my baby." But I couldn't tell then if it was a believed mother or a piece of Romanian sheet music. But the little guy was shivering from fear and cold. It was decided that Mr. Monroe and boys would make a house for him out of the old crate, some heavy-duty wire mesh from garage. For the night, the boys would make the bed for him in the shoebox. Toby and Pete ran outside to find the crate, and Mrs. Monroe went to the kitchen to get some milk and lettuce. Mr. Monroe sat down, a dazed expression in his eyes, as if he was wondering how he became to be sitting in his own living room in the wet raincoat with a strange bunny on his lap. I signaled to Chester, and the two of us casually moved over to a corner of the room. We looked at each other. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think the rabbits like milk," he answered. Chester and I were unable to continue our conversation because a deafening crash commanded our attention. Pete yelled from the hallway, "Ma, Toby broke the rabbit's house." "I didn't, I just dropped it. People let me carry it." "You are too." "Okay, fellas," Mrs. Monroe called out as she entered the milk and lettuce. "Let's get it in here as little hysteria as possible, please." That lettuce looks repulsive. If the milk wrapped, I will get it. At that moment, the crate arrived, barely standing in the strain of being pulled two directions at once. Toby said he kept only sometimes I thought when I noticed he's got leftover ham sandwich in his drawer. Toby is a nice kid, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't hurt that he shared his stash with me. It was, after all, one of those late-night parties in Toby's room that I first developed my taste for chocolate cake. And Toby, noting my preference, and kept me in chocolate cake ever since. Peter, on the other hand, it doesn't believe in sharing. It's the only time I tried to on his bed, he rolled over on me and pinned me by my ears so that I couldn't move for the rest of the night. I had a crick in my neck for days. But he's mine, Toby said. I found him. You sat on him. You mean I found him and you're sleeping in my room. You can keep Smelly Old Harold in your room and Chester too if you want to, but I'm gonna keep the rabbit in mine, Pete said. Smelly Old Harold. I would have bitten his ankles, but he hadn't been changed his socker for a week. Smelly indeed. I think the best place for the rabbit is right here in the living room, on that table by the window. It's a light there, and he will get lots of fresh air. He'll be able to see the rabbit better. Too bad, Squirt. Okay, said Mrs. Monroe, through clenched teeth. Let's put him to bed and make him comfortable, and then we can all get some sleep. Why? Peter asked. I don't want to go to sleep. Mrs. Monroe smiled a little sweetly at Pete. Look, Ma, said Toby. He's not drinking his milk. Chester nudged in the ribs. Excuse me while I make myself available. Hey, said Toby, we gotta name him. Can that wait until tomorrow? Asked Mr. Monroe. The boys shouted in unison. No, we have to name him right now. I have to say I agreed with them. It took them 3 days to name me, and those were the 3 most anxious days of my life. I couldn't sleep at all, worrying that they were really gonna call me Fluffy, as Mrs. Monroe had suggested. Well, all right, sighed Mrs. Monroe. What about, say, Bun Bun? Uh-oh, there she goes again, I thought. Where does she get them? Yuck, we all said. Well then, how about Fluffy? She offered hopefully. Peter looked at his mother and smiled. You never give up, do you, Ma? Meanwhile, Chester, who had also been named Fluffy for a short time, was rubbing against Mrs. Monroe's ankles and purring loudly. No, Chester, no, she said, pushing him aside. He wants to help us name him, don't you, Chester? Toby asked as he scooped him up on his arms. Chester shot me a look. I could tell this was not what has in his mind. Come on, Harold, Toby called. You've got to help name him too. I joined the family with serious thinking began. We all peeled into the box. It was the first time I had really seen him. So, this is your rabbit, I thought. He sort of looks like a Chester. On he's got long ears and a short tail, and the motor in his nose. Well, said Pete after a moment, since we found him at the movies, why we call him Mr. Johnson? Who's Mr. Johnson? Asked Toby. The guy owns the movie theater, Pete answered. No one seemed to like the idea. How about the prince? Said Mr. Monroe. Dad, said Toby, are you kidding? Well, I had a dog named the Prince once, he replied lamely. Prince, I thought. That's a silly name for a dog. We found him in Dracula, but let's call him Dracula, Toby said. That's a stupid name, said Pete. No, it's not. And anyway, I found him, so I should get to name him. Mom, you're not going to let him name you, are you? That's a favoritism, and I'll be traumatized if you do. Mrs. Monroe looked in wonder at Pete. Please, Mom, please, Dad, let's name him Dracula, cried Toby. Please, please, please. And with each please, he squeezed Chester a little harder. Mrs. Monroe picked up the bowl of milk and moved toward the kitchen. Chester followed her every movement with his eyes, which now seemed to be popping out of his head. When she reached the kitchen door, she turned back and said, Let's not have any more arguments. We'll compromise. He's a bunny, and we found him at a Dracula movie. So we will call him Bunnicula. Bunnicula? That should make everybody happy, including me. What about me? Muttered Chester. I'll be happy she puts down the milk. Well, guys, is that okay with you? She asked. Toby and Peter looked at one another, and then at the rabbit, and smile that grew on Toby's face. Yeah, Ma, I think that name is just right. Pete shrugged. It's okay, but I get to pet him. Okay, I'm gonna put the milk back in the fridge. Maybe he will drink it tomorrow. What about Chester? Toby said, dropping the printed cat to the floor. Maybe he would like it. Chester made beeline to Mr. Monroe and looked at her plaintively. You've already had your milk today. She reached down and patted Chester on his head and walked into the kitchen. Chester didn't move. Okay, bedtime, said Mr. Monroe. Good night, Bunnicula, Toby said. Good night, Counter Bunnicula, Peter said sarcastically, and what I took to be his attempt at a Transylvanian accent. I may be wrong, but I thought I saw a particular movement from his cage. Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. I licked Toby good night. Good night, Smelly Harold. Good night, dumb Chester. I drooled on Pete's foot. Harold drooled on my foot. Good night, Pete, Mrs. Monroe said with great finality as she came back into the living room, and then more calmly. Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe up to the stair together. You know, dear, Mr. Monroe said, that was very clever, but Nicola, I could have never had thought of a name like that. I think a Prince is a lovely name, too. The room was quiet. Chester was still sitting by the closed kitchen door in a state of shock. Slowly he turned to me. I wish they had named him Fluffy, was all he said. Chapter 1. The Arrival. I shall never forget the first time I laid these now tired old eyes on our visitor. I had been left home by the family with the admonition to take care of the house until they returned. That's something they always say to me when they go out. Take care of the house, Harold. You are the watchdog. I think their way of making up for not taking me with them, as if I wanted to go anyway. You can't lie down at the movies and still see the screen, and the people think you're being impolite if you fall asleep, start to snore, or scratch yourself in public. No, thank you. I'd rather be stretched down on my favorite rug in front of a nice whistling radiator. But I digress. I was talking about that first night. Well, it was cold. The rain was pelting the windows, the wind was howling, and it felt pretty good to be indoors. I was lying on the rug with my head on my paws, just staring absently at the front door. My friend Chester was curled up on the brown velvet armchair, which years ago he staked out his own. He covered the whole sheet with his cat hair. I chuckled to myself, picturing the scene tomorrow. Next to grasshoppers, there was nothing that frightens him more than the vacant cleaning. In the midst of this reverie, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't even bother to get up to see who it was. I knew it must be my family, the Murners, since it was just the time to be. Since it was the time to be the movie to be over. There they stood in the doorway, Toby and Pete and Mom and Dad and Monroe's. There was a flash of lightning in its glare. I noticed that Mr. Monroe carrying a little bundle with tiny, glistening eyes. Pete and Toby bounded into the room, both talking at the top of their lungs. Toby shouted, "Put him over here, Dad!" "Take your boots off, you're soaking wet," replied his mother. Somewhat calmly, I thought, under the circumstances. But Mom, what about the purse that stopped dripping on the carpet? Would somebody like to take this? Asked Mr. Monroe, indicating the bundle with the eyes. "I'd like to remove my coat." "I will," Pete yelled. "No, I will," said Toby. "I found him. You dropped him. I will not. You will too. Mom, Pete punched me." "I will take him," said Mrs. Monroe. "Take off your coat this minute." But she became so involved in helping the boys out of their coats, she didn't take him at all. My tranquil evening had been destroyed, and no one had even said hello to me. I whimpered to remind them that I was there. "Harold!" cried Toby. "Guess what happened to me?" And then all over again, everyone started talking at once. At this point, I feel I must explain something. In our family, everyone treats everyone else with a greater respect for his or her intelligence. That goes for the animals as well as the people. Everything that happens to them is explained to us. It's never been just goodbye, Harold, or use the little box Chester, or in our house. Oh no, with us it's hey Harold, Dad got ready and now we are in a higher tax bracket. Or come sit on the bed, Chester, and watch this Wild Kingdom show. Maybe you're your relative. Which shows just how thoughtful they are. But after all, Mr. Monroe is a college professor and Mrs. Monroe is a lawyer. So we think of it as a letter special household, and therefore we are letter special pets. They took the time to explain the surrounding arrival, the little bundle with the glistening eyes now among us. It seems that they had arrived at the theater late, and rather than trip over the feet of the audience already seated, they decided to sit in the last row, which was empty. They tiptoed in and sat down very quietly, so they wouldn't disturb anyone. Suddenly, Toby, who's the little one, sprang up from his chair and squealed his head sat on something. Mr. Monroe told him stop making a fuss and move to another seat, and Toby said he wanted to see just what it was his head sat on. Usher came up and shushed them, and Mr. Monroe borrowed his flashlight. What they found under Toby's chair was the little blanket bundle. It was now sitting on Mr. Monroe's lap. They now unwrapped the blanket, and there in the center was a tiny black and white rabbit, sitting in a shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied to his leg with a ribbon. There were words on the paper, and the Monroes unable to decipher them. It's a totally unfamiliar language. I closed it to see better. I closed to better look. Afferent lines running through these veins, and Russian Wolfhound happens to be one of them. Because my family got around a lot, I was able to recognize the language as an obscure dialect of the Carpathian Mountain region. Roughly translated, it read, "Take good care of my baby." But I couldn't tell if it was left from the bereaved mother or sheet of Romanian sheet music. It's a piece of Romanian sheet music. Out of an old crate and some heavy-duty wire mesh from the garage. For the night, the boy would make the bed for him in the shoebox. Toby and Pete ran outside to find the crate, and Mrs. Monroe went to the kitchen to get some milk and lettuce. Mr. Monroe sat down, a dazed expression in his eyes, as if he were wondering how he became to be sitting in his own living room in the wet raincoat and with a strange bunny on his lap. I signaled to Chester. Two of us casually moved over to a corner of the room. We looked at each other. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think rabbits will like milk," he answered. Chester and I were unable to continue our conversation because a deafening crash commanded our attention. Pete yelled from the hallway, "Mom, Toby broke the rabbit's house." "I didn't, I just dropped it. People let me carry it." "And it's too big, Toby's too little." "I'm 9, you are 2. "Okay, fellas," Mrs. Monroe called out as she entered with the milk and lettuce. Chester turned to me and said under his breath, "The lettuce looks repulsive and any milk left. I get it." I certainly wasn't going to argue with him. I'm a waterman myself. At that moment, a crate arrived, barely standing with a string from the two directions full. "That's not fair. Harry sleeps in his room." Only sometimes I thought, when I know he's got a left over ham sandwich in his drawer. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't hurt to share the stash with me. It was, after all, one of the right night parties in Toby's room that I first developed my taste for chocolate cake. And Toby, noting my preference, and kept me in chocolate cake ever since. Pete, on the other hand, he doesn't believe in sharing. Only time asleep on his bed, he rolled over on me and pinned me by my ears, and so that I couldn't move for the rest of the night. And I had a crick on my neck for the day. I found him as you sat on him, you mean. I found him and he is sleeping in my room. You can keep Smelly Old Harold in your room and Chester too if you want to, but I'm gonna keep the rabbit in mine, Pete said. Smelly Old Harold. I would have bitten his ankle. I knew he hadn't changed his socks for a week. Smelly indeed. I think the best place for the rabbit is right here in the living room on that table by the window. It's a light there and the hook got lots of pressure. Pete, taller than I am, Toby cried. He will be able to see the rabbit better. Okay, said Mrs. Munner through clenched teeth. Let's put him to bed and make him comfortable and then we can all get some sleep. Why? Peter asked. I don't want to go to sleep. Mrs. Munner smiled a little sweetly at Pete. Look, Ma, said Toby, he's not drinking his milk. Chester nudged me in the ribs. Didn't I tell you? He asked. Excuse me, while I make myself available. Hey, said Toby, we gotta name him. Can that wait until tomorrow? Asked Mr. Monroe. The boys shouted in unison. No, we have to name him right now. I have to say I agreed with them. It took them 3 days to name me. Those were the 3 most anxious days of my life. I couldn't sleep at all, worrying that they were really gonna call me Fluffy, as Mrs. Monroe had suggested. What about, say, Bun Bun? Uh-oh, there she goes again, I thought. Where does she get them? Yuck, we all said. Well then, how about Fluffy? She offered hopefully. Pete looked at his mother and smiled. You never give up, do you, Ma? Meanwhile, Chester, who had also been named Fluffy for a short time, stood lobbying against Mrs. Murner's ankles and purring loudly. No, Chester, not now, she said, pushing him aside. He wants to help us name him, don't you, Chester? Toby asked, as he scooped him up on his arms. Chester shot me a look. I could tell this was not what he had in mind. Come on, Harold, Toby called. You've got to name him too. You've got to name him. We all peered into the box. It was the first time I had really seen him. So, this is your rabbit, I thought. He sort of looks like Chester, on his got longer ear and a short tail and more in his nose, said Toby. Since we found him at the movie, why call him Mr. Johnson? Who's Mr. Johnson? Asked Toby. The guy who owns the movie theater, Pete answered. No one seemed to like the idea. How about the prince? Said Mr. Monroe. Dad, said Toby, are you kidding? Well, I had a dog named the Prince once, he replied namely. Prince, I thought, that's a silly name for a dog. We found him at a Dracula movie, let's call him Dracula, Toby said. That's a stupid name, said Pete. No, it's not. And anyway, I found him, I should get to name him. Mom, you're not gonna let him name him, are you? That's your favoritism, and I'll be traumatized if you do. Please, Mom, please, Dad, let's name him Dracula, cried Toby. Please, please, please. And with each please, he squeezed the Chester a little harder. Mrs. Monroe picked up the bowl of milk and moved toward the kitchen. Chester followed her every move with his eyes, which now seemed to be popping out of his head. When she reached the kitchen door, she turned back and said, Let's not have any more argument. We'll compromise. He's a bunny, and we found him at a Dracula movie, so we will call him Bunnicula. Bunnicula. They should make everybody happy, including me. What about me? Muttered Chester. I won't be happy when she puts down the milk down. Put the milk down. Toby and Peter looked at one another, and then at the rabbit. A smile grew on Toby's face. Me and Ma, I think that name is just right. Pete shrugged. It's okay. Then I get to feed him. Okay, I'm gonna put the milk back in the fridge. Maybe he will drink it tomorrow. What about Chester? Toby said, dropping the printed cat to the floor, and looked up at her plaintively. Do you, Chester? You've already had your milk today. She reached down, patted Chatter on his head, and walked into the kitchen. Chatter didn't move. Okay, bedtime, said Mr. Monroe. Good night, Bunnicula, Toby said. Good night, Count Bunnicula, Pete said sarcastically, in what I took to be his attempt at a Transylvanian accent. I may be wrong, but I thought I saw a flicker of movement from the cage. Good night, Harold. Good night, Chatter. I licked Toby good night. Good night, Smiley Harold. Good night, dumb Chatter. I drooled on Pete's foot. Mom, Harold drooled on my foot. Good night, Pete, Mrs. Monroe said with great finality as she came back into the living room. And then more calmly, good night, Harold. Good night, Chatter. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe went up the stairs together. You know, dear, Mr. Monroe said, that was very clever. But Nicola, I could never have thought of a name like that. Oh, I don't know, Robert. She smiled as she put her arm through his. I thought the prince is a lovely name, too. The room was quiet. Chatter was still sitting by the closed kitchen door in a state of shock. Slowly, he turned to me. I wish they had named him Fluffy. That's what he said. 자, 오늘은 여기까지만 해보도록 하겠습니다. 와, 이 사람이 자만하면 안 되는 거예요. 그냥, 그죠? That was he said. I wish they had named him Fluffy. 그러니까 와, 이게 입에 익었다, 아니 그냥 말할 수 있다, 이런 개념하고 또 이 책을 듣고 따라하는 거하고 또 상당히 틀리네요. 야, 이렇게까지나 힘들지는 몰랐는데 이게 새로운 도전 같아서 굉장히 재밌습니다. 그래서 어쨌든 이렇게 이제 시작된 거 다음 낭독부터는 책을 보지 않고 음원만 들어서 따라하는 것으로 제가 끝까지 한번 해보도록 하겠습니다. 첫 번째 낭독했던 날 걸 제가 봤는데 참 못하더라고요. 인상도 쓰고 사실 잘 보이지도 않았고 막 이렇게 했는데 시간이 지나면서 책을 보고 하는 건 굉장히 이제 능숙해졌어요. 근데 이제 책을 보지 않고 소리로 하는 거는 이제 또 별개의 도전이기 때문에 이 새로운 리듬이나 액센트 감이 있는 것 같습니다. 이게 보니까 제가 그냥 읽을 때 하고 들으면서 읽을 때 액센트를 엄청 세게 주네요. 영어는 액센트를 굉장히 많이 주는데 저희 같은 경우는 액센트가 없는 이제 그러니까 있기는 있으되 굉장히 약한 이제 우리 모국어의 특징 때문에 저도 읽으면서 저도 모르게 액센트가 약해지는 거죠, 그죠? 그래서 액센트를 굉장히 강하게 줘야 된다라는 걸 오늘 섀도우 리딩을 하면서 알게 되었습니다. 자, 오늘부터는 섀도우 리딩 들어갑니다. 감사합니다.